Kelly here. Well, Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 3 has begun. And what we're going to do here is I'm going to give the recap for Episode 1, then I'll say a few words about it, then I'll do the recap for Episode 2, and then the old man and I are going to just jump into the discussion. So, here we go. Star Trek Strange New Worlds, Season 3, Episode 1, Hegemony Part 2. We left off last season with the Gorn kidnapping some crew members and a bunch of civilians, and Captain Pike's girlfriend was pregnant with Gorn babies. So, before rendezvousing with Admiral April, the Enterprise crew tags the Gorn ship carrying their people so they can rescue them later. Admiral April sends Pike on an unofficial mission to save their people and the civilians. Scotty rigs a transponder to make the Enterprise appear to be a Gorn vessel, which gets them to some binary stars where the Gorn homeworld seems to be. La'an wakes up in a digestive sac on the Gorn ship, which is very reminiscent of a Wraith ship from Stargate Atlantis. She, Dr. M'Benga, Sam Kirk, and Ortegas fight their way to a shuttle and leave the ship with codes that will allow the Enterprise to beam the civilians to the Enterprise. Nurse Chapel and Spock save Captain Batel's life by using Una's Illyrian blood. Nurse Chapel tells Spock she's still going away for 3 months on that fellowship, and she thinks being apart will be good for them individually. The Gorn have begun an invasion, so the Enterprise crew needs to think fast in order to stop it. They decide the best course of action is to start a long sleep cycle for the Gorn by causing a specific solar flare. It works and everyone is saved. The Federation is safe from the Gorn, and the kidnapped crew and civilians are beamed back to the Enterprise. This episode was a combination of the Aliens franchise with the Xenomorph Gorn, Stargate Atlantis, with the Gorn having a lot in common with the Wraith, and Star Trek The Next Generation, The Best of Both Worlds, Part 2, where the crew of the Enterprise put the Borg in a sleep cycle in order to defeat them. If I look at this episode as fanfiction or a different franchise and not a prequel to TOS, it really wasn't that bad. I like the Alien franchise, I like Stargate Atlantis, and I like TNG, so this episode really wasn't all that different from where it appears they got their source material. The romantic relationship crap was kept to a minimum in this episode, so after this recent season of Doctor Who, this was so much better by comparison. Unfortunately, then we watched the next episode, which was nothing but romantic drama, and reminded me of the singing Klingon episode in all the worst possible ways. So, on to the recap for Episode 2. Star Trek Strange New Worlds, Season 3, Episode 2, Wedding Bell Blues. 3 months have passed since the previous episode. The Enterprise is in space dock for repairs and preparing for the Federation Day Centennial. Spock is looking forward to Nurse Chapel's return, but she shows up with her new boyfriend, Dr. Corby. Spock is heartbroken, and the new bartender mixes Spock a drink and asks him if he's ready for a change. Spock drinks the drink, goes to bed, and wakes up the next morning with Nurse Chapel next to him in his bed, and they are engaged to be married. Long story short, the new bartender, who is also Spock's wedding planner, is a Q. Looks like Trelane from TOS. Apparently, in the credits, it did say it was Trelane. And John Delancey is the voice of this Q's father. In this episode, Uhura and Ortegas' brother seem to hit it off. Erica Ortegas is having emotional problems, and we see what appears to be a shadowy Gorn in the reflection of Ortegas while she's working out. All the goodwill I gave Episode 1 was ruined by Episode 2. The crowning glory of this episode was the Wham song playing while everyone danced at the non-wedding reception. This was a terrible episode and reminded me exactly why I don't like this show. Because obviously, Spock and Nurse Chapel didn't get married. He read some poem to her, or recited some poem to her, that Dr. Corby had recited to her, and that's when she fell in love with him, and it snapped her out of it, and she realized she was marrying the wrong man. This was crap. This was utter crap. I couldn't believe how crappy this was.
Although it was rather non-offensive as far as content, it was derivative. Even the way they were breaking themselves out of that reality that Trelane set up, it reminded me of that episode of TOS where those spores infected the crew and strong emotions are what broke them out of it. I just don't understand what they're doing here. The solution of putting the Gorn to sleep, tricking them to go into a sleep cycle, was pretty much taken from the Best of Both Worlds Part 2 in TNG era, and I don't understand why somebody didn't catch that story idea. Because if you ask a mainstreamer what they know of the next generation of Star Trek, Q and the Borg are usually the two things that come up if somebody asks that question.
I think that this is definitely made for the mainstream because those of us who are fans of TOS, TNG, etc., Stargate Atlantis, Aliens, old school science fiction, we're going to recognize these Dr. Frankenstein together pieces from other franchises. And I think normies, people who aren't familiar with those other things, they're just going to watch it and be like, oh, okay, I get that reference. Q. And to them, it's not going to be offensive. It's going to be all new for the most part, except there's going to be little things like Q to allow them to feel like, oh, I do belong here. I recognize that.
Well, the Q thing I didn't mind so much because that was kind of targeted a little bit at older school fans because there's been debates ever since TNG was introduced about whether Trelane from TOS in the Squire of Gothos episode was a Q. And so this kind of was, it felt like a fan film where somebody was pursuing that idea, but it was done in a fan film way. It wasn't done in any official Star Trek way.
I had no problem with them establishing that Trelane was a Q. What I did have a problem with is that, okay, so if they meet Trelane now, what happens when they meet him again later? They'll have been exposed to an entity like him. I mean, they may not even realize that it is him again later, but they'll have had this experience before. It feels to me like they are taking all of these moments from the original series and they're transferring them in a different form, a slightly twisted form, into Strange New Worlds. And it's like we went and watched the episode of TOS where we meet Dr. Corby.
What our little girl's made of.
Yes. And in one of the scenes, Nurse Chapel is asked if that was Dr. Corby's voice, and she says, "Mr. Spock, have you ever been engaged?"
Well, that's the thing. If we pretend that Strange New Worlds is in the same continuity as TOS, then what Nurse Chapel did in TOS by asking that question was probably one of the worst, jerkiest things you could ever do in the world. Rubbing salt in his wounds if Strange New Worlds, what they're setting up with her now, is a thing. That whole tried romance that Spock was waiting for her to come back in Strange New Worlds, this episode, and then she just shows up with this Dr. Roger Corby, and she knew Spock was waiting. Again, I hate to be dragged in to this soap opera crap that they did. I'm just saying, if we go along with it, I mentioned this during that Klingon episode where Nurse Chapel was presented as probably one of the worst human beings I've ever seen in Star Trek. And then this continues that line here because she was being unusually cruel with dragging Dr. Corby onto the ship here the first time Spock saw her after that 3 or 6 months of whatever she was doing, studying with him. And then there comes the ethics issue about, so in TOS, I just never really thought about whether she was working under Dr. Corby. I thought they were just working together. But in this Strange New Worlds episode, this was like one of those things that universities usually get in trouble for, where professors are having affairs with their students or graduate students.
Oh, she was working under him, all right.
Yeah. Because I got to separate these two episodes. So the first episode, to me, it was co-written, I guess, by Davy Perez. Davy Perez seems to only have seen the Alien franchise, so that's all he seems to want to be able to do. So in addition to ripping off Aliens, this was ripping off, as you said, Stargate Atlantis. It was ripping off Star Trek The Next Generation. And there are a few other little things you could argue were ripped off as well, but I'm getting tired of going into these things.
Yeah.
But overall, it was pretty non-offensive. The story moved along. I didn't care for when Pelia was basically mentoring Scotty on the fly, diminishing the Scotty character. And they hate Mr. Spock. They hate that character. They hate Spock, the people who make this show. Because both the first episode and the second episode, they were crapping all over Spock again. And I don't know why they're picking on just that one character when they pick on somebody. Because they don't seem to pick on, I guess Scotty they picked on a little bit, but not to the extent they were doing Spock. And the first episode here, it was just same old, same old. There was nothing really horrible about this other than the stuff that we've mentioned. But, ripping off TNG, and I guess to finish my thought that I was saying, so what I don't understand from Davy Perez and whoever the other writer was here was people know about the Borg from TNG. So they most likely know, if nothing else about TNG, they're probably familiar with the best of both worlds. And so taking that same idea about we're going to trick the Gorn to go into a sleep cycle, just like Data did with Picard giving the advice, well, Acutus giving the advice, but Picard was peeking through, for Data to do the same thing in that TNG episode. Did they think that nobody was going to catch that? That's like one of the most famous things if you follow TNG, or even if you're a normie, you probably know that. This isn't like some subtle thing. I was telling Molly, we watched a series from the 90s called Father Ted, and they had an episode where they were trying to create a song for Eurovision, and what they ended up doing was stealing a tune from some band from, I think it was Norway? I think the country doesn't matter. It was some old band from Norway, and they stole the tune because they didn't think anybody would know the tune. And then as they were getting ready to perform, one of the characters was in the elevator and heard that as elevator music, that tune, and panicked. Oh, we can't use that tune because that's more famous than we thought. And it just reminds me of what happened here. Clearly, TNG, the sleep cycle, everybody knows that. If you're a Star Trek fan, you know that. Why would you do that here? The other stuff is almost irrelevant at this point. And then you had Ortegas mumbling around. Again, remember, in case you didn't know, Ortegas flies the ship. And she actually was mumbling that crap in this episode as she was flying one of the Gorn ship back to the Enterprise. Same old here. The first episode of these two was by far the better one, but it was still a bad episode. And at this point, I think they've established that this is not in any way tied to TOS's continuity, because so many things aren't lining up that it doesn't really matter. I think with the hot dog episode, when they showed that they moved the timeline for the eugenics war around, that they established to anybody paying attention that this is not the proper continuity. And then they dropped little things like Nurse Chapel asking in TOS, have you ever been engaged before? And if you factor in that this Strange New World series is supposed to be in the same continuity, that dialogue doesn't make any sense at all. And there are little things like that that just don't make sense. I realize it's a minor thing, but Roger Corby in TOS did not have an accent. He did here. I think it was an Irish accent, but I can't be 100% sure.
He sounded like Roy from the IT crowd.
And going to that second episode, where the first episode, I think, was their attempt at trying to, I guess, cater to proper Star Trek science fiction fans in their own stupid way. But this second episode about the wedding, I don't know who this was catering to. I mean, middle-aged housewives who like watching soap operas in the afternoon?
Hey.
I don't know. Well, but it was such a different tone, a different audience here.
Yeah, I just assumed this was meant for maybe Gen Z. You know, this young group, and this romantic, basically a farce. I just assumed it was for them, because older people were well beyond the whole marriage, running around.
Well, and behaving like children.
That too.
Because this episode initially had Nurse Chapel behaving so horribly to Spock by showing up at Roger. And there was a scene where they were in the Not 10 Forward. Nurse Chapel was giving some story about how her and Roger were up on this mountain or something. And Spock knew some of Chapel's history. And it was such an awkward situation because Nurse Chapel was essentially crapping all over Spock at this point. And then they made Spock to be like this lovesick puppy. And that's why when Trelane asked him what he wanted, I don't know if he asked him, but that was what Trelane gave him, the ability to pick a wish. And so Spock wished that he would be with Chapel in this new reality. And then as that was going on, they were painting Roger Corby as the offended one here. So any sympathy you had for the Legacy Spock character was completely flipped around, and you were supposed to feel bad for, oh, poor Roger Corby. And I'm sorry, Nurse Chapel, between this episode and the Klingon episode, Nurse Chapel is a piece of garbage. And I think what we said in that episode, or actually Molly said in the Klingon episode, is she was wanting Uhura to curb stomp Chapel in the street. Well, she couldn't do it this episode because, well, she was busy.
With Ortegas's brother.
Yeah, and some other love interest thing. Because I think I agree with you. I think I'm figuring out what these shows are doing, what these movies are doing. Because this kind of goes back to last week we reviewed the Superman 2025 movie, which Molly and I did not like at all. And it's a very split thing out there in the world. And I think what it is that I'm dealing with a generational gap thing. Because I think that Superman 2025 movie was geared specifically for Gen Zers, which I think probably worked based on the success that it's having on some parts of the demographics. Whereas being in the old Gen X area, I found that to be completely childish and simplistic and insulting to the legacy character of Superman. And I think that's what we're dealing with here. Because that second episode with the wedding, as an older Gen Xer, I thought it was stupid and silly and just waste of my time. But my guess is they maybe found the formula for Gen Z between the Superman film and what they're doing here in Strange New Worlds with that wedding episode. Maybe Gen Z, and I'm guessing here, again, if somebody's a Gen Zer and you want to chime in on this, you'd have to be kind of a younger Gen Zer. But it just seems like what they're catering to Gen Z for, and maybe they found that this works, is Gen Z wants like lighthearted, I don't want to have to think about it stuff. So kind of like the 1966 Batman or some of that 60s stuff, I guess the Monkees, if we go back to the 60s. That's the kind of things I think that are coming back into favor now. And I was telling Molly, I'm starting to wonder, because for me, rewatching a television show, sometimes a film, but mostly TV shows, is something I like doing, but I'm an older Gen Xer. And so when I point out that these new things that they're putting out there have zero rewatchability, and then sometimes in the comments area, we'll have people saying that doesn't matter to them, and I'm wondering if maybe to Gen Z, rewatching stuff is completely irrelevant. They don't rewatch stuff. In a layered story, I don't pick up everything the first time through. So, like when I used to watch Babylon 5 back in the 90s, I minimal would watch an episode twice. The Expanse, I did the same thing. I would watch an episode at least twice. Because on second watching, I was still picking up stuff I didn't catch the first time. But even after I picked up most of the pieces, I agree. Once I'm at that point, I tend to watch things just because it's familiar. The high moments I get to relive. And I'm just thinking that there's a generational divide here because not only are these kids probably on their phones, but I don't think they really care about if something's rewatchable. So when, as an old Gen Xer, I point out, well, this has zero rewatchability again. I think they just kind of look at me and shrug their shoulders and go, what are you talking about, boomer? And because to them, it's not a big deal because they don't do that anyway. And I'm pointing this out because the old Gen Xers and the real boomers, we're dying off every day, literally dying off. And if these franchises are going to survive, these companies have to figure out a way to target Gen Z and alphas. And maybe they figured it out. Maybe this naive 1960s silliness, like I said, the old 66 Adam West Batman, or like the latter seasons of Lost in Space that were in color, that completely ridiculous stuff that's just, we look back at it now only because of our childhood. Do we say, well, okay, I'll rewatch this? But like the sillier stuff that happened in the latter Lost in Space, there's, for me, almost no rewatchability doing that. I very much enjoyed the black and white Lost in Space, but the color episodes, that's where it got ridiculous, and it just didn't work for me. And 66 Batman, that's so much camp that if you grew up with it, it's probably okay. But if you're like a Batman fan, you most likely don't acknowledge that 66 Batman series because it was just so campy and silly. Because that's how I looked at the Superman film. It was like 66 Batman. It was campy and silly. And from an older Gen Xer point of view, I just didn't see how this was to be considered as part of the cinema continuity for Superman. Because it just seemed so silly. It was like an Asylum parody or something. But I'm just starting to think that that's what Gen Z and alphas may be. I don't know. Again, alphas are a hard one because I don't have anybody I can talk to that's in the alpha group. But maybe that's just a generational gap here. I know our channel skews older. I guess I'm making a distinction. Because when it comes to like Star Trek Discovery, that was pushing war crimes and horrible, horrible things that no generation should ever be okay with. So Star Trek Discovery, I'm not making that excuse for. That was just a horrible piece of crap. But with Strange New Worlds, because there are some people that actually say they do like this. And I'm just wondering if it's kind of that, even if you're not a Gen Zer by age, maybe you kind of just think the same way a Gen Zer does. And that's why this silly Strange New World stuff that they do, like the Klingon musical episode, or this Wedding Bell episode, maybe that's why that works for you, is it's just a generational thing. Because after seeing the reaction from Superman 2025, which to me is pretty clear cut, for me there's like no real debate to be had here. It's just a piece of crap. But there's a lot of people that disagree with that, and I think we're talking past each other. I think it's generations talking past each other. And I think Gen Z just wants it light, silly. Whether somebody's good or not, I don't know if that factors in, because the way I'm looking at this is when I look at millennial entertainment, to me that's that deconstructionist, dark take on things. Basically the Ronald D. Moore Battlestar Galactica, and then later on the comedy The Office, that kind of cringe humor that they think is funny. Like, that doesn't work for me. Even Man of Steel, I think, was aimed at millennials. And it didn't work. As an older Gen Xer, that didn't work for me. And so that's what I think after Superman 2025, it actually got me to ponder a bit more meta about what's going on. And I think that's why people are talking past each other, is because of that generational divide. That second episode, the wedding episode, that was complete garbage to me. There was nothing there. Even the Trelane cameo that they were putting in there was not done in a way that made sense to me. But, you know, if you're doing camp, maybe that doesn't matter. You know, when you have a rubber shark as Batman's on a rope ladder off down from a helicopter, and you got a rubber shark on you from the 1966 Batman movie, maybe that's okay. Maybe that's what the kids want now, is that sort of just over-the-top slapsticky type stuff. Camp galore. Because the first episode was basically a carryover from last season. I have nothing really useful to say except they were stealing from other properties again. The second episode, other than like Trelane and having John Delancey as Q, I'm not really sure they stole anything per se. Well, a little bit with, like I said, that strong emotions waking you up from the stupor you were in, which I think was from TOS. But other than that, it just seemed like it was just like a lighthearted soap opera thing, kind of like the hot dog episode that we mostly enjoyed once you figured out it wasn't Star Trek and you just took it as a Hallmark Channel romance story or something. And I guess this could be the same type of thing if you just say it's not Star Trek, but it's the Bridesmaids movie. I didn't like that movie. I didn't see that movie. I didn't see Bridesmaids, so I can't gauge it 100%, but I had no want to see it. I didn't want to see this episode.
If this had been a Hallmark movie, then Nurse Chapel would have been the evil ex who broke Spock's heart, and Spock would have been the sympathetic character who finds new love. That's how that would have gone.
And they kind of were hinting that maybe him and Discount Drummer might form at the very minimum of friendship, maybe something more.
I don't know if I should cringe or what.
Because that friendship seemed to come out of nowhere. Discount Drummer was teaching Spock how to dance. And again, that reminded me of from TNG when Dr. Crusher was teaching Data. You know, the other straight man was teaching Data how to dance. And it reminded me a lot of that scene of that episode of Star Trek.
Yeah, it did.
Because I think that was for O'Brien's wedding, is that when Crusher was teaching Data how to dance. So again, it was related to a wedding. So that also was borrowed from a previous Star Trek property.
Yeah, personally, I'm tired of all the borrowed elements that we're seeing in these shows. I'm done with that. I want to see something new. Why can't they just write something new?
I don't think they're capable. We've speculated for years now, this is before it became really big, that these people were using AI at least to give them outlines, and then the AI was probably pulling from old Star Trek and other resources, and these people writing are so limited in their background that they can't pick up that maybe we should change this because this was taken too directly from this property. Because I think that, was it Kirsten Beyer, who I guess wrote some Voyager novels in the 90s. She was the co-writer of the second episode, the wedding one. That doesn't really impress me much. I don't know.
No, all of this just feels like fan fiction to me, and not very good fan fiction at that. First episode was better than the second by a lot, but that really just says how bad that second episode was.
The smearing of Nurse Chapel, too. They're making Nurse Chapel, she's a piece of garbage.
She's a very unlikable character. I don't know why she has all these men chasing after her. She's horrible. It's like they want to get treated like crap.
I don't know what they're doing. And then you've got Pike and Captain Battelle, and there was some weird dialogue going on there about them staying together, and then she made some comment. Afterwards, we paused it and asked each other, what did she say? Like, she was saying some statement about, I'll get you set up in my quarters or something. I can't even understand what she was saying. What are they talking about?
I have no idea. No idea.
I mean, I guess we did see when they were going to have in that altered reality in the wedding episode, they were going to have a bachelor's party for Spock, and Pike had on his green alternative Kirk tunic, I don't know if we've seen that before on Strange New Worlds, but it still didn't look right. It just was an Easter egg, which is all this show is just Easter eggs.
And stolen moments from other series.
Yeah. I guess young people don't notice these things, but I'm sure in our comments, people are going to go up and down all the episodes in both of these episodes of Strange New Worlds, all the TNG and TOS episodes that these were stolen from. And then if we got anybody that actually watched Stargate Atlantis, you could bring in a lot of stuff from Stargate Atlantis when it comes to the Wraith and what they were doing.
Yep. Along with, waking and sleep cycles and, hibernation cycles, etc. The way the ships were. But if we start going down that path, we'll be here all day because so much of this stuff is just taken from other places. Like I said, where's the original content? Because I'm not seeing it.
And they're saying they're going to get, 2 more seasons of this show?
Somehow, I guess they better just start strip mining faster.
Which I don't understand because I'm hearing these rumors. These rumors are like 2 months out, 2 months ago, where they were saying, oh, there's going to be a purchase. Paramount's going to be bought out by Skydance, but Skydance doesn't want all this crap Star Trek. And it's like, okay, that sounds nice. But then you're hearing, oh, but we're going to get 2 more seasons of Strange New Worlds, and we're going to get this Starfleet Academy show, and we're going to get, I think there was some other show that they were, or movie or something they were going to do. And it's like, well, wait a minute. How can those 2 rumors be the same? If it's good news that Skydance wants all the Star Trek crap gone, but then there's all these things that are going to continue on or start new, how do those 2 rumors, how do they mesh together? Because I don't understand if they don't want more Star Trek crap from Secret Hideout, but all these shows and extra seasons are still happening, then what is the rumor then? Because those 2 rumors don't align up with each other.
Personally, I hope that Starfleet Academy show never sees the light of day.
Because I guess they filmed it already, and they're in post-production now, and we got 2 more seasons of this crap. But Skydance is saying no more Star Trek like this. We're going to fix this. How? Like how? You got new stuff being greenlit and being made. Like, they should be halting all production of all this stuff right now.
The only way to fix this would be to burn all copies of all of this and just walk away and pretend it never happened.
Well, do a tax write-off like they did with Batgirl back in the DC universe.
Yeah. Back
when they had that movie in 2020 and they decided to just scrap it versus releasing it.
Yep.
You could probably tell by our tone here. Are we recommending these 2 episodes? I mean, not any more than any other ones. If you like Strange New Worlds, then you'll probably like these episodes. I did not like these episodes because the first one was same old, and the second one, they were crapping on Spock for the entire episode.
Yeah, I at first, thought that first episode, hey, this isn't as bad as usual. That romantic garbage was kept to a minimum. All right, there's a lot of rip-off here, but whatever. Boy, but then that second episode more than made up for what wasn't in the first as far as that romance goes.
They learned nothing.
No, they didn't.
Not as far as targeting older school fans. Now, maybe they figured out the formula for Gen Z. But if they did, maybe stop bringing up the older Easter eggs. If you're just saying this is a Gen Z alpha series now, there's nothing here for you older people, then stop putting Trelane in there. Stop putting Easter eggs. Only old schoolers would have gotten that Q, being the voice of the parent of Trelane, was trying to tie together the decades-old debate about whether Trelane was a Q. Only old schoolers would even understand what that was nodding to.
Well, I think that was supposed to be an Easter egg to keep us happy. Because all the rest of that, the thieving from an episode from TOS, essentially ruining the timeline even further, that's done to please a different demographic. We're stuck with Easter eggs, and that's supposed to be, yeah.
So the boomers, which, means actual baby boomers and Gen Xers and probably older millennials, we're just supposed to accept the Easter eggs and shut up. Sit there and shut up. That's all we're getting from these shows, and for some people that works. Some older people think that works, even though I don't think these series are meant for them at all. But hey, if you can feel young go for it. Molly and I were talking, and this reminded me of, and Molly, because I couldn't figure out where this came from, but there was something in my back of my head about some adult that was pretending to like stuff the kids like because he wanted to seem cool. And then Molly reminded me that it was actually from South Park. It was it Stan's dad?
Yeah, it was Randy Marsh.
Who was pretending in one of those episodes that he was, I think it was music, that he was liking the new music. And I think his wife asked, "You don't really think that's good, do you?" "Yeah, man, it's good. This is some good music." And he didn't in any way understand or like the music. He just wanted to feel like he was with it in, the young generation. I'm not willing to pretend that I like this stuff, so I don't want to be with it with the young generation. This just, to me, isn't working for an old Gen Xer like myself. Again, I would not recommend seeing these episodes. We didn't even spend a ton of time going over the details of every little thing that happened in the episodes.
There's no point.
I mean, they double-deckered them together, and we were not going to spend a ton of time doing both episodes. Just not going to do it. Probably following this point on will be more detailed with what we're doing, just a little bit more, because we don't have the burden of doing 2 episodes at once. But if these were 2 good episodes, we would have liked to do that. But no, these were one mediocre episode at the beginning and then one really bad episode as the second episode. Yeah, we're not spending a ton of time doing the recap accurately.
And let's face it, the only thing going forward that probably mattered in either of these episodes was when Ortega's, her reflection had that Gorn behind her.
That mirror thing, isn't that similar to when in Discovery, when, who's the doctor and the engineer? The engineer was, they were looking in the mirror and they were seeing something weird in the mirror, and it was like supposed to be some sort of nod to the mirror universe. And like, what's this thing with reflections with?
Oh, see, it made me think of Picard and his stupid son and the weird reflection that he was seeing in the mirror.
Well, that too. I mean, these all go together because they're all secret hideout stuff.
Yeah. So
I'm surprised there wasn't the color red in this episode, because they also love using the color red for some reason. This episode didn't have that, but this whole idea about something weird happening with a reflection. They did that in Discovery, they did that with Picard, and now they're doing it here. It's like, geez, you've been to that well one too many times. Why don't you give it up? It's not interesting.
Well, again, they don't have anything else. So there's no new territory that's being covered here. A lot of it's just stolen stuff. So, if you've seen these other things, you've seen this. And then there's a lot of here you don't want to see, like Spock's fake wedding. That was horrible. That was painful to watch. It was awful. You don't want to watch it.
We will continue on with our reviews here, but this is tough.
It looks like this is going to be another season of garbage, which is unfortunate because I thought that first episode, though a huge ripoff, was at least tolerable to watch. But man, that second episode, that was awful. That's all I have to say about that. If you haven't watched this, don't bother. It's not worth it. Find something else to do with your time. People tell us, "Oh, what are you doing watching your old DVDs?" Well, it's better than watching this crap. At least I'll be satisfied at the end. So yeah, pull out your old DVDs. Watch something better. Go back, watch Stargate Atlantis. Go watch something from the Aliens franchise. Watch TNG, watch TOS. Don't watch this crap. And that being said, well, we'll be doing this again next week. So until then,
take care.